Hi, David. Thank you very much. Eu quero explicar para todo mundo. Agora, aqui embaixo tem um globinho, apareceu, chamado Interpretation. Por favor, cliquem ali. E depois, em português, para ouvirem a tradução da palestra do David. David, I'm here with your presentation. I translated to Portuguese. And if it's okay for you, I can show it. Ok? E eu quero, então, apresentar aqui o professor David Kennedy. Ele é um dos maiores criminologistas do mundo hoje. E no período que era estudante, né, em Harvard, ele, junto com outros professores, os Estados Unidos vivia uma grande crise de violência, né? E um período conhecido como nada funcionava, algo parecido com o que a gente passa ainda hoje no Brasil, né? E ele formulou essa estratégia. Ele é professor de justiça criminal hoje no John Jay College, que é uma faculdade de criminologia, uma das mais importantes do mundo, que é dentro da Universidade de Nova York. Ele é diretor da National Network for Safety Communities, né, uma rede nacional de comunidades seguras que vem implementando a estratégia de dissuasão focada, uma organização não governamental, né, e a estratégia consegue minimizar prisão e encarceramento, aumentar a legitimidade das polícias e fortalecer as relações entre polícia e comunidade, reduzindo homicídios. Né? E a gente teve a honra, né, de estudar a metodologia que ele propôs e junto com as lideranças que eu já falei aqui, o Dr. Marcelo Cabral, o Coronel Facim e o Dr. Márcio, aplicar essa experiência e conseguimos um resultado fenomenal. Então, passo a palavra para o professor David Kennedy, agradecendo muito sua disponibilidade para estar aqui conosco hoje, encerrando esse nosso primeiro curso de segurança baseada em evidências.
Thank you, Alberto. Good afternoon. No, it's still good morning, even with you, isn't it? So good morning, everybody. Very glad to be with you. Wish I could be with you actually physically. We're all doing this way these days. I'm going to talk about this portfolio, this operational approach that Alberto's been talking about, and that I just heard the mayor talking about. I'll say this at the end of this talk as well, but let me say it at the beginning that in the United States, in my office at John Jay, as Alberto said, I've been part of developing this entire approach going back almost 30 years now. The work that has been going on in Brazil that you've just heard about, and I expect we'll hear about more in years to come in Pelotas, is some of the most impressive focused deterrence work, the most impressive work of this kind that anybody has done anywhere. And we didn't know anything about it until it was several years in, and we started to hear about it from Alberto and the other partners. We were extraordinarily impressed then, and I can report for my team that every time we hear more about it, we're more impressed. So let me talk about this fundamental approach. And Alberto, can we bring up the PowerPoint presentation? Very good. Thanks so much. If we can advance, I'm not sure who's running this, so I'm not quite sure to whom I'm speaking, so I appreciate this.
I am.
Okay. So focused deterrence is a very simple framework for doing something about violence and serious crime. It's not a program. There are all sorts of different versions of this. Everybody who does it differently. There are dozens of applications of this aimed at homicide and gun violence going on in the United States right now. There are the applications you've been hearing about in Brazil. There are several others in Europe. None of them look like any other one. So this is a way of thinking about and addressing these issues. It's not a program. It's not specifically defined and then replicated across settings. It's basically a strategic framework, and it's remarkably simple. It focuses on what are always the small numbers of people that are driving the violence or whatever the other underlying issue is. It figures out ways of talking to them. This is not a negotiation. It's not a deal, but it absolutely depends on the authorities and others communicating with that small number of high-risk people. It uses existing law and investigations and legal tools in different ways. It employs what we call the moral voice of the community, that the capacity of ordinary citizens, members of the public communities, to set and enforce their own standards about what they want and what they don't want. And it employs what we call outreach and support, which is a helping hand, social services, various kinds of things that those at high risk want and need. So if we can advance. So in the US, this goes back to the mid-1990s. It started, as Alberto just said, with a focus on homicide. It has gone on from there over the years to develop proved approaches that address not the gang and group focus of the original intervention, but individual violent offenders, drug markets, domestic violence, safety and security in jails and prisons, and all sorts of other things. This turns out to be, again, a simple, flexible, often very powerful approach. So if we can advance. So if you do crime prevention, one thing you hear all the time is we're different. This place is not like that place. This city is not like that city. This neighborhood's not like that neighborhood. Our issues are not your issues. That's always true. Places are always different. And then it turns out that in some important core ways, places are really not that different. The most important elements here is that research has found over and over and over again that these most serious issues are driven by very small numbers of people. Those are folks usually who both perpetrate violence and are victims of violence. They mostly hurt each other. These are overwhelmingly about groups, not about individuals. They're about cartels and gangs and neighborhood drug crews and that kind of thing. Existing law and policing and criminal justice almost never works for these issues the way we've been using them, but they can be used in new and different ways. There are things that the authorities and communities can do to get the attention of these groups that are not purely about the criminal law. Communities have a lot of power to govern themselves. These high-risk folks are usually in all kinds of trouble, and they need and often will take help. You can talk to them. Most of this is not secret. You know who people are, and you can talk to them. And over again, it's turned out to be possible to take a particular issue, take these fundamentals and figure out how to do something. If we can advance. So the finding that has transformed violence prevention over the last decades and moved it into what we all now call evidence-based practice is this fact. It's that in city after city after city, that can be Boston, it can be San Salvador, it can be Chicago, it can be Glasgow, Scotland, it seems just not to matter. Over and over again, when you look at the homicides are connected to groups that collectively represent right around 0.5% of the city. This is a number we see over and over again. It really doesn't seem to matter much from place to place. But if you start with the killings, you find the association with these gangs and groups and networks. Everybody in those groups and networks is a tiny proportion of the city. And most of those people never kill anybody. They never get killed. Even in that high-risk world, there are very, very few people who really make things happen, what in our setting we call impact players. So when you get down to the end of this, it's literally 0.1% or so of any city that really makes all this happen. And just to say it again, we normally think about those folks as offenders, and that's right, they kill people. Overwhelmingly, they're the people who get killed as well. Alberto, if we can advance. This is just a graphic way of illustrating exactly that point. That 50% is what we find at a minimum. It's often a great deal more than that. Homicide and gun violence and this sort of thing is the biggest public safety problem we have in most places, short of civil war or something like that. It's a very big problem. It's a very small problem in terms of the people who are driving it. If we can advance. So this is what we find over and over again. This is a network map from the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. This has nothing to do with geography. This is just laid out so the lines are simple. Each of these nodes is a group on the street, what we would call a gang or a set or a posse or a drug crew. These are small, they're not very organized. You do find big and organized most of the time. That's not what you find. This simply says the groups that have the red lines connected are in vendetta. There's repeated retaliation, what in the US we call beef. The green lines mean they're loosely allied. The blue lines mean it could go either way. These are unstable relationships. And in every single city, again, over decades of work across countries, this is always the way the underlying violence dynamics look. And this can look different in different places. So there will be more groups, fewer groups, more red, more green. But this basic pattern of groups and conflict and alliance essentially always underscores the violence issue. And in settings where there are big structured gangs, and that is absolutely an issue that Brazil deals with, as does Mexico, as do a lot of other places, what we usually find is what we think of as one big gang is actually comprised of smaller sets that look a lot like this. The gang will not be a unified corporate structure. The big gang is actually made up of smaller sets, smaller cells, and they will often be in these same relationships of conflict and alliance. So this simply is the way homicide and gun violence works. That's our fundamental realization about the way the streets produce violence. If we can advance. The fact that this is about groups really changes things. So if you're in criminal justice and there's been a pair of homicides, what criminal justice usually tries to do is solve those homicides. So there are two groups, they're beefing, they're in vendetta, there's retaliation. Somebody on each side kills somebody on the other side. The police and the prosecutors do a great job. Those people get arrested and go to prison. And on the street, in the community, both groups are still there. Their antagonism is still there. The violence will continue. Prosecuting and incarcerating those two people doesn't change the underlying violence dynamic much at all. And we suddenly realize why so much of what we do about violence just doesn't work the way we think it should. Because whether we're in law enforcement or whether we're in a community-based organization, almost everybody all the time is focusing on individuals. Lock one person up, get one person a job. And that's incredibly important work, but it fundamentally doesn't reach this group dynamic.
Eu que ela disse que não era prioridade.
Oh, I just heard some chatter in the background. I'll continue. We also find that many of the men, and they're usually men, involved in this don't actually like what's going on. And they will do terrible things and they'll resist the police and all that kind of thing. And that's absolutely real. But they are under pressure from their friends. They're under pressure from their enemies. They don't see any safe way out. And the groups will continue to do awful stuff. But it doesn't necessarily mean that many of the people involved in this really enjoy the way they're living. So the fact that this is group stuff really matters, and it changes the way we should understand and act on what's going on. So if we can advance. So there is again, a simple, flexible, and what turns out to be a pretty powerful way of going about this. And if we can advance. So Alberto, I'm not quite sure where we are in the presentation. Hang on a second. Could you advance?
Here is background, David.
This is a moment when I really wish I spoke and read Portuguese. Okay, I think I can handle this. So the basic framework here is to identify these core groups, to talk with them directly, That's not just a one-time thing, it's a continued thing. It is about focusing explicitly on the homicide and most serious violence. This is not about being in a gang, being in a group, other sorts of crimes, selling narcotics, that kind of thing. None of that is okay. To say it again, this is not a deal, but the focus is explicitly on the violence because the violence does the most damage. It puts the groups on notice ahead of time how law enforcement will be acting, that under certain circumstances, the entire group will get a kind of attention the group does not want. There is what we call, again, the moral voice of the community, the articulation of the community about what it does and doesn't want. And for those who want it, the sort of help they need to improve their lives. And Alberto, if we can go ahead. So the three basic elements outside of the direct communication are a different way of using law enforcement. So said earlier, the group dynamic requires a group response. That doesn't have to be somebody goes to prison for every homicide. It can be when the authorities know that a particular group has done a killing, that as many members of possible of that group have something happen that they don't want. And the classic example here is the group is selling drugs on the street. They've committed a killing in order, for example, to protect their drug business. The authorities can or can't prosecute that homicide, but they can absolutely flood that neighborhood with officers. They can change the traffic patterns. They can talk to the landlords in the houses from whom people are doing the drug business. The guys selling drugs are driving unregistered cars in the United States. They're breaking the drug and the alcohol laws. They're using drugs in public. They're drinking beer in public. None of those are things that we think of as a response to homicide. But if we tell the group ahead of time that the next time one of their members kills somebody, that's what's going to happen. And for the next 6 weeks, everybody in that group is going to make less money, not live their life the way they want to, have to go get their car out of the tow lot, and maybe find another apartment. They don't like that. And as minor as those things seem to be, the record on the ground is when groups know ahead of time that this will happen, that absolutely is enough to change their behavior. If we can advance. And anybody who does policing or criminal justice or investigations knows there are enormous numbers of tools that the authorities have to affect the lives and the livelihood of criminals. And what focused deterrence does is look at all those different options, think about whether they fit a particular group in a particular situation, figure out how to make them fit that particular group in that particular situation, and then tell the groups ahead of time, this is the way it's going to work. And the core move here is to say, look, these are people, these are groups that are committing fantastic numbers of crimes all the time. That's just the way the world works. The fact is, these guys get away with almost everything they do. They know it, we know it. You know, that's the situation we're all used to. But if we say to them, when there is a killing, we're going to go to the group involved and we're going to do everything we know how to do along these lines. And we're not going to pretend we can do this for every single crime, but we will do it when there's a homicide. That suddenly means that the cost of a homicide becomes predictable, something that the groups don't want, and they're generally not stupid, and they change their behavior. So focused deterrence is really, really, really simple. It's fundamentally saying to the groups, the stove is hot, don't touch it, and then making sure that we actually carry that out. And one of the elements here at the bottom of this first group is what we call notifying up. That's about saying to, so if there's a kind of a criminal hierarchy, and there's a group on the bottom who has some sort of relationship to somebody higher up the hierarchy, notifying up is a practice of going to that person higher up and saying, for example, the group in the community that you're selling drugs to is killing people. If they kill another person, we're going to make your life difficult. So tell them to stop it. And I'm going to come back to that at the end of this presentation because that's particularly significant in Brazil right now. So if we can advance. The second element is what academics call informal social control. It's what we call the moral voice of the community. It's the fact that no matter who you are, and no matter what sort of awful things you're doing, almost nobody involved in this is literally a psychopath. They can be terrible people doing terrible things, but there are still people they respect. There are still people that they will listen to. And when I first came to understand this and would be talking to a room full of law enforcement in the United States, I would say to them, raise your hand if when you were growing up you were afraid of the police. And in a room full of 100 people, 4 or 5 or 10 people would raise their hand. If I said to them, raise your hand if when you were growing up you were afraid of your mother, everybody raises their hands. And the fact is, we all care more about what our mothers think than about what the police and the judge and the government thinks. And that means that if we can find the people that these most at-risk people care about and set something up so that their mother or the gang member that they looked up to when they were coming up, or their priest, or literally, the older lady on the block who's not scared of anybody and who knew them when they were a kid and can take them by the ear and get their attention. That is a tremendously important intervention. And part of what's so important about the fact that this is focused on the homicide and the gun violence is that overwhelmingly, even people who kill people don't think it's okay. They know it's wrong. And when people they care about say to them, this is wrong, you have to stop it, that actually can make a very big difference. So Alberto, if we can go ahead. And there are some very predictable things that those community people can say. The people that they're speaking to really get this. They really do respond to it. When we have these direct conversations, they will listen to the law enforcement people. They will listen to the social service providers. The community folks really, really get their attention. And so people think of this as, soft. It's really not soft at all. Alberto, if we can go ahead. In my world, at least in the United States, when people talk about gang members and drug dealers, they think about, you know, rich people driving fancy cars, living in mansions. And those people are there, that's right. Most people in this high-risk world are not that at all. They're often, you know, just one step above homeless. They're not making a lot of money. They're afraid of their enemies. They're afraid of their friends. They often won't have a place that they know that they can live next week. They care about their little brothers and sisters. They care about their mothers. Those folks are often in trouble. They're hungry. They're living in bad conditions. And so saying to them, no matter who you are, we don't want you hurt. We don't want you killed. If at all possible, we don't want you in jail. And we're going to help you any way we can. Tell us how we can help you, is tremendously powerful. And most of this turns out not to be about the traditional thinking that everybody has to have a job, everybody has to go back to school. It's literally, do you have food on the table? Is somebody trying to hurt you? We will make them stop. Is your mother and your family living in a place with no power? We'll get the power turned back on. It's in our stuff, it's awful things like, your brother's been killed, we'll help you with the funeral expenses. It's very concrete, very immediate stuff. And Alberto, if we can go ahead. So in practice, this is about taking these fundamentals, picking a particular problem, and figuring out how to make this work. And as I said at the beginning, this is not a program. It's a framework. It's a way of thinking about the issues. So the facts on the ground are overwhelmingly, if we start with the most serious public safety issues, they're going to be driven by small numbers of extreme people. So the people who need to be part of this are law enforcement, community figures, social service providers. You need to get a small number of those key people together, get them focused on the problem, figure out what's going on the ground. And this is where especially academics spend a lot of time talking about data and data sharing. Now that's important. It's typically simply not as important as going to the people in the police and in prosecution and in city government and in the community who deal with this issue every day and saying, what's going on? Who's driving things? What's really happening here? That often won't be any formal database or in any formal intelligence product, but the frontline police officers will say, now, we know what's going on here. There's a drug crew that's operating here. There are about 15 people in it. These two guys are making everything happen. They're fighting with the group on the other side of town. It's been going on for 15 years. It started over a girl. None of the people involved in this dispute are even involved anymore. The groups hate each other. Things have been quiet for the last couple of years, but one of these guys' older brothers just got out of prison. He's throwing his weight around, and now everybody's carrying guns again. And people who deal with this every day know those things. So you take those facts, you take these fundamentals about direct communication, the basic elements of prior notice of criminal justice action, the community engagement, the outreach and support. You figure out how to make this work on this problem, and then you do the work and it never works the way you think it's going to. So you keep on adapting it and changing it. And every single successful application of focused deterrence has taken these fundamentals and then figured out how to get the work done in particular settings. So Alberto, if we may. There's a lot of evidence on this now. So Alberto, let's just keep going. Yeah, thank you. So lots and lots and lots of formal studies here. These are big results. You know, in my academic world, there's a phrase in English, which is statistical significance. We're going to look for the outcomes that formal statistical analysis can tell us, you know, something probably happened here. And in crime prevention, we're used to statistically significant results that, you know, they're 5%, 10% improvements. Focused deterrence on a good day can get really big results. And it will produce those results relatively quickly because this is fundamentally a communications issue. You're talking to the high-risk people, you're saying to them things are different, change what you're doing. And if they believe that, then they change their behavior and you get big results fast. So I was looking at the graphs that the mayor was putting up, showing those really substantial reductions. That's what happens here. This is a lot of work. It's not easy. The reason it's worth doing is because it will produce really substantial outcomes. Alberto, if we can go ahead. So the formal social science literature on this is increasingly concluding across dozens and dozens of studies that this is the best thing we know how to do for certain of these issues. It is not perfect. We don't know how to fix this stuff, but we absolutely know how to make a difference in a way that a few years ago we didn't. Alberto, if we can go ahead. And these are findings, I grabbed them from a Zoom meeting just a couple of days ago. This is Malmo, Sweden, which has been doing this work. They've had issues the last couple of years making international headlines with street groups in the three major Swedish cities. Very serious gunplay, automatic weapons, bombs and grenades. Sweden had never seen anything like this. The city of Malmo began this work several years back, and this is what they're seeing. This is a bar graph over some years of shootings, and you can see for yourself what happened here. 2021 obviously is only a few months in. Nobody has been shot in Malmo so far this year, and nobody who has been part of this work and these issues in Sweden can remember a time when that was true. If we can advance. This is the same finding. These are bombings and grenade discharges, which has been a real issue there. Same fundamental dramatic improvement. And Alberto, once more. So I said at the beginning how impressed we've been with the Ciara work, the Pelotas work. And I wanted to draw your attention earlier to this notion of notifying up, and that focused deterrence is not a program. It's a way of thinking about this work. And what Alberto and the partners did, as this is our interpretation, they took these fundamentals, they unpacked the problem, they found this connection to a very structured gang hierarchy, and they did what we call notifying up. They went to senior figures in those hierarchies. They were in prison. They could affect their prison conditions. They said to them directly, if the killing continues, we will affect your prison conditions in ways that you don't like. That was credible, it was believable, it was meaningful, and the results on the ground with respect to the violence are profound. This is a classic and just both common sense and extraordinarily impressive application of this simple, but just to say it one last time, pretty high-powered logic. And Alberto, we can advance. So that's what I have to present today. This is my organization's website. This is what we do. If you're interested in this, and if we can help you, let us know. This is what we're here for. There are all kinds of documents and studies and all sorts of things here. I hope this has been interesting, and let me give this back to the organizers, and I think we've got some time for discussion.
Muito obrigado, David. Peço a intérprete, pode transmitir para ele? Tá? Ele está me ouvindo?
Yep.
Ok.
Yep, all set.
Muito obrigado. Eu acho que foi realmente... Eu ainda hoje, quando escuto, já ouvi o professor David algumas vezes, mas eu sempre chego a me emocionar. E aqui no WhatsApp, eu estou falando com o doutor Marcelo, que é o juiz de Pelotas, o doutor Márcio e o coronel Facim. Os três, né, nós aplicamos juntos, e eu vou contar em 2 minutos. Nós lançamos o pacto em 2017, várias estratégias, prevenção, aplicação da lei, policiamento em pontos quentes, mas nos meses seguintes, os homicídios continuaram subindo. A gente criou, no início, um programa para aumentar o número de julgamentos, de júris. O doutor Marcelo criou uma segunda vara do júri, e ele aumentou em 120% o número de julgamentos, de processos de julgamento de homicidas. Mas nada disso estava funcionando. Então, nós ainda tivemos uma grande guerra, mais de 50 homicídios em 30 dias na cidade, e aí nós, então, sentamos juntos e decidimos estudar o que o professor David vinha sugerindo, né? As polícias sentaram juntas, de forma reservada, estudaram juntas, melhor, atualizaram, né, as informações que cada uma tinha, junto com o judiciário. E o doutor Marcelo, com muita coragem, ele disse, eu vou falar com eles. Né? Nós temos em Pelotas 3 grandes facções, muito grandes, uma com mais de 1.000 membros aí estimados, armamento pesado, dinheiro, tudo o que nós conhecemos. E o doutor Marcelo sentou com os líderes das 3 organizações e disse, agora nós estamos trabalhando unidos e não vamos mais aceitar homicídios. Ou teremos transferências. Né? Os líderes serão transferidos. E alguns dias depois nós tivemos um homicídio e imediatamente alguns líderes daquele grupo foram transferidos, né? No mesmo dia. E o doutor Marcelo foi novamente ao presídio e disse, está ocorrendo a primeira punição. Se tiver mais homicídios, nós vamos seguir punindo dessa forma. Né? Rápida, integrada, focada, e a partir daquele instante a cidade começou a ver redução de homicídios. Exatamente dessa forma. Né? Não teve aumento de prisões, nós não tivemos aumento de efetivo, né? E não há nenhum tipo de negociação, né? As polícias continuaram fazendo suas operações, seus trabalhos, mas aqui é um diálogo sobre homicídios, né? E o doutor Marcelo está aqui, professor David, mandando um abraço. Eu queria tentar puxar ele para a tela aqui, mas não estou conseguindo. Mas é realmente uma experiência muito potente. Não é nenhuma forma de aliança, João. Isso tem sido testado em mais de 80 cidades. A grande questão é que, ao invés de fortalecer as facções, como a gente faz muitas vezes hoje, prendendo mais gente, né, a gente consegue regular os homicídios de uma forma mais direta, né, dentro da lei, aplicando a lei naqueles que mais tem que ser aplicada. Né? Nós tivemos preso, transferido para o sistema federal, está em isolamento, porque ele não seguiu, ele cometeu, mandou matar. É um fortalecimento das inteligências e uma integração das forças. E as organizações sentem isso. E ouso dizer, professor David, sim, no Brasil, talvez hoje as organizações são maiores em tamanho do que em outros países, talvez desenvolvidos, em número de membros. E por isso mesmo, na minha opinião, a estratégia tem um potencial maior de redução. Né? É o contrário. Aqui, as facções, sim, têm mais poder e por isso essa estratégia funciona mais. Né? O último, né, o doutor Marcelo, num outro debate, perguntaram para ele, mas como as facções agora não têm mais conflitos? Sim, eles têm conflitos, só que eles resolvem os conflitos financeiramente, pagam multas um para os outros e pararam de se matar entre eles. E a cidade se estabilizou. Né? Nenhuma outra estratégia conseguiu reduzir homicídios dessa forma no mundo. É disso que a gente está falando. Essa é a vacina que a gente tem hoje disponível, a melhor. A vacina, sem fazer propaganda aqui, é a vacina da Pfizer. Né? Funciona. Então, é uma das abordagens que a gente gostaria de trazer. Quero passar aqui para o professor David, né? As perguntas vêm muito nesse sentido de se fere a lei, né? Se isso é um acordo que fere o judiciário, né? Deixa o judiciário ou as forças expostas aos grupos. São preocupações absolutamente importantes, né? E que hoje eu tomo a liberdade de falar, em Pelotas as forças estão mais fortes, as forças da justiça, da polícia, com mais inteligência, sabem o que está acontecendo na cidade, né? Sabem como atuar de forma rápida e precisa para segurar guerras. São episódios que a gente contém. Um homicídio numa madrugada pode desencadear 30 homicídios na semana seguinte. E a gente age proativamente, dizendo, não, se reagir aqui, né, terão punições. Então, é muito potente e quero lhe passar, professor David, para fazer suas considerações finais e lhe agradecer e deixar esse debate aberto. Né? É um diálogo importante, complexo, é uma visão inovadora e diferente. Né? Temos muitas outras estratégias que a gente conversou ao longo desses 3 dias, desde prevenção na primeira infância, nas escolas, com adolescentes, como a gente viu ontem, na experiência do Chile, a maior experiência de trabalho com jovens violentos do mundo, hoje, que o Chile vem aplicando. Outra metodologia, terapia multissistêmica. Né? Conhecemos o policiamento em pontos quentes. É um cardápio de evidências que a gente pode ir usando o que a gente quiser. Né? Então, professor David, por favor.
No, that sounds exactly right. I spend a lot of time saying to folks, this is a whole lot simpler than we think it is. And the problems themselves are horrendous. We spend a great deal of time thinking about, different frameworks for approaches, root causes, system reform, that kind of thing. And all of that's extremely important. But in some ways, it is much simpler than we make it. And when we think about our own lives and our own families and our own children, for example, we love our kids. We love them even when they do terrible things. We tell them that some things are more important than others. We expect them to do their homework and clean the dishes. But if they punch their sister in the face, that one's really different. We tell people ahead of time that there will be consequences, especially for those most important things. If we lie to them and we don't do those things, then they don't trust us anymore, and we actually encourage them to do those bad things. This is really common sense. And then making it work is very complicated because we're sort of redirecting resources and law and partnerships that have been developed for other reasons to put together the kind of structure that so clearly has made such a difference with homicide and pelotas. And just to say again where I started, we are just so impressed by that piece of work. We've learned a lot from it. People can do this kind of thing. So again, I hope this is of interest to your audience.
Muito obrigado, com certeza, né? Eu sempre destaco, professor David, que Nova York, que é muito conhecida no Brasil, que é outro tipo de experiência, né? Mas Nova York continua tendo, já li pesquisas que tem 9 vezes mais tráfico de drogas que o Rio de Janeiro. E continua tendo. Mas certas estratégias aplicadas lá ou em outras cidades reduziram a violência, né? Então, nós temos como reduzir a violência de forma imediata e salvar vidas, né? E a dissuasão focada, como a gente viu ao longo do curso, e eu falei hoje, nem sempre as evidências inovadoras, elas são aceitas de forma rápida, né? A gente viu aqui vários casos, a Tâmara contou ontem do médico que falou que lavar as mãos, os médicos precisavam lavar as mãos e perdeu o título de médico, foi expulso de Viena. As evidências muitas vezes nos mostram caminhos diferentes do que nós estamos acostumados, mesmo que esses caminhos não estejam funcionando, né? Mas a gente é acostumado a seguir o mesmo caminho. Então, muito obrigado, professor David. Temos aqui mais de 400 pessoas, mais de 100 cidades ouviram esse debate hoje, que foi muito importante. E eu quero, encaminhando aqui o encerramento, passar para o Major Dagoberto, nosso vice-presidente do Instituto Cidade Segura, para fazer um resumo do nosso dia e o encerramento desse nosso curso. A gente vai manter contato pelas redes, vamos seguir trocando experiências, conhecendo coisas novas, gostando de algumas, preferindo outras. Thank you, David. Então, muito obrigado a todas e a todas. Foram 3 dias muito bacanas, maravilhosos de estar com vocês, que a gente continue juntos, buscando evidências e construindo a paz e reduzindo a violência nas nossas cidades. Dagoberto, por favor.
Bom, bom dia a todos e a todas. Quero cumprimentá-los, né? E dizer que no encerramento deste nosso primeiro curso de prevenção à violência baseada em evidências, muitas foram as lições que ficaram aqui para nós. Eu acompanhei, obviamente, atentamente os 3 dias, e o que eu mais pude tirar de proveitoso, aqui, olhando o chat aqui do lado, foi a esperança que ainda os gestores municipais têm de que é possível nós fazermos uma segurança pública com mais responsabilidade. Eu não conseguiria hoje aqui citar todos os nossos palestrantes, porque provavelmente eu cometeria alguma indelicadeza em deixar de citar alguns. Mas eu gostaria de agradecer a todos os nossos painelistas que abrilhantaram esses nossos momentos. Gostaria de agradecer a todas as pessoas que se dispuseram a participar do nosso evento. Nós fizemos um esforço muito grande para ter mais de 1.000 inscritos, todos os estados brasileiros, e mais de 100 cidades representadas aqui. Muitos gestores municipais, policiais militares, psicólogos e psicólogas, professores e professoras, enfim, uma gama de pessoas debruçadas em fazer uma segurança pública com mais responsabilidade. As evidências científicas comprovam que é possível que se consiga fazer uma segurança pública que seja diferente do que tem sido feito até hoje. Até hoje, praticamente, nós vamos fazendo mais do mesmo e, em muitos casos, a gente não consegue obter os resultados justamente por isso. Não se conseguirá obter resultados positivos na segurança pública se nós não enfrentarmos esse problema com inteligência. Vimos aqui vários exemplos e, principalmente, ali no nosso segundo dia, que a gente abordou os aspectos da educação socioemocional para prevenir, né, a criminalidade. Eu pude acompanhar atentamente as participações de todos e frisar o que muitos dos nossos gestores disseram da integração dos municípios. Hoje tivemos a oportunidade de ouvir as belas palavras aqui do Dr. David Kennedy, da Paula, entre outros, da prefeita Paula Mascarenhas, de Pelotas, né? E a gente percebe na fala da Paula aquilo que já vem se repetindo ao longo desse seminário, que é a responsabilidade dos municípios. Hoje em dia, nós não conseguimos mais ter uma segurança que não leve em consideração a participação dos municípios, a participação dos munícipes, das pessoas, da sociedade dos municípios, que são as pessoas que estão diretamente em contato com a criminalidade, envolvida com os problemas da sua região. Então, sem mais delongas, eu gostaria de agradecer toda a equipe do Instituto Cidade Segura, que se esforçou incansavelmente para que esse evento acontecesse. Em nome da nossa presidenta, Tâmara Biolo Soares, eu gostaria de deixar o convite para nosso próximo seminário, nosso próximo curso, que será em 2022, mas acompanhe as atividades do Instituto Cidade Segura, que ao longo do ano de 2021, nós iremos proporcionar outras atividades, e a gente gostaria de já previamente convidá-los a participar. Muito obrigado a todos e até uma próxima oportunidade.
Está sem som, Álvaro.
O Instituto Cidade Segura tem a missão de desenvolver, aplicar e disseminar estratégias de segurança pública e prevenção da violência baseadas em evidências. Somos uma organização composta por profissionais de diversas áreas que enfrentam diariamente os desafios da violência no Brasil. Trabalhamos com um novo paradigma, a segurança pública baseada em evidências, em que os programas realmente funcionam para reduzir a violência. Nossos pactos pela paz em Pelotas, Canoas, Lajeado e Niterói mostram que é possível reduzir homicídios, roubos, furto de veículos e outros crimes aplicando um conjunto de estratégias integradas e inovadoras. Trabalhamos com a dissuasão focada para reduzir os homicídios, o policiamento em pontos quentes para combater os roubos e o aumento da fiscalização para conter pequenos delitos. Além dos pactos, desenvolvemos programas de prevenção da violência destinados a escolas, famílias e cidades, que vão desde a educação não violenta na infância, educação socioemocional na escola, até a mudança de trajetória de jovens em medida socioeducativa. Juntos, podemos levar a mais cidades brasileiras uma abordagem inovadora e eficiente para a segurança pública e juntos vencer a violência.